Let me ask you something honestly. How many of you feel that audit is one of the most boring and difficult subject in CA course? Be honest, because I have heard this from almost every student कि सर ऑडिट रट्टा मारना पड़ता है, सर कि ऑडिट में याद क्या रखना है समझ में नहीं आता, सर ऑडिट में लिखना क्या है वो समझ में नहीं आता. And if you feel the same, you are not alone. Hi everyone, I am CA Vatsal Shah, your mentor at Chartered World Academy. And today, I am not here to teach audit. I am here to change the way you look at audit. Because the problem is not the subject, the problem is how it is studied. When I was a student, I used to feel the same struggle कि यार audit बहुत ज़्यादा theoretical लगता है. इतने सारे standards, ethics, and still no clarity what the examiner wants us to write in the exams. But one thing completely changed when I practically entered in the world of auditing. When you actually perform audit, when you actually identify risks and make professional judgments, one thing was clear that audit is not just theory. Audit is logic, audit is common sense, audit is professional thinking. And that is what exactly I'm bringing to you through this YouTube series. Because मैं यहाँ पे आप लोगों को सिर्फ ऑडिट याद नहीं करवाऊंगा. Of course, I'll help you with numerous techniques, mnemonics, etc. But more importantly, I'll help you understand audit, how the way chartered accountants apply it. At Chartered World's Academy, my approach is very simple. In this YouTube series, we are going to focus on four important points. First, breaking down auditing standards into smaller and practical concepts. Second, understanding why behind every procedures. Third, learning how to think like an auditor. And fourth, mastering exam oriented writing answers. Because passing CA exams is not about writing more, it is about writing what the examiner wants us to write. And one last thing, audit can be one of your strongest and most scoring subject if you stop mugging up and start understanding it. With that, I, CA Vatsal Shah, invite you to be a part of this journey because we are not going to study audit. We are going to talk audit and we are going to think like an auditor. And if you are someone who feels lost in audit, who feels struggles while remembering answers, or who feels lost in standards, then this series is exactly for you. And if you are someone who are serious about your CA journey, I'll make sure that that you stay connected and subscribe with Chartered World Academy because this is just the beginning. I know many of you are beginning with CA Final Audit after a long gap and one of such subjects that are not so favorite anymore. But before beginning the actual syllabus, I would want to make sure that your base is stronger, base is correct. And that's why we are going to revise the important concepts from CA Inter. Because when the base is clear, the entire subject is going to make much more sense. So, in this lecture, do not take this as a CA Inter revision, but take this as the strong foundation base for your CA final audit. And with that, let's begin the import revision of important concepts from CA Inter. Now, ऑडिट हमारे लिए कोई नया सब्जेक्ट नहीं है, राइट? क्योंकि हमने इंटरमीडिएट में ऑडिट पढ़ा है, हमने इंटरमीडिएट में ऑडिट क्लियर किया है. बट इफ आई आस्क यू व्हाट इज द डेफिनेशन ऑफ ऑडिट, will you be able to recollect? Will you be able to answer me as per the ICAI study module? What is the definition of audit? No, right? There would be very minimal of people who could hardly remember that audit is an independent examination of financial information of an entity, whether profit oriented or not, irrespective of its size and nature. with a view to express an opinion whether the financial statements are true and fair view or not, right? This is the definition of audit as per ICAI's study module. Now, when we talk about audit, the first and foremost important point that that we have to remember is auditors के objectives क्या है? What are the major objectives of audit? What are the major objectives of auditor? First and foremost, to gain reasonable assurance whether the financial statements are free from material misstatement due to fraud or error. Whether the financial statements are free from material misstatement due to fraud and error. And second, to communicate the findings in audit report. These are the two major objectives which we have learned in chapter number 1 of CA Inter and SA 200 and SA 200. So हमने बात की auditors के objectives की. Now we would have to also talk about the scope of audit. Scope of auditor. What are the inclusions and what are the exclusions? Now, अगर मैं आपको बोलूं कि एंटिटी का फाइनेंशियल स्टेटमेंट्स देखना है, फाइनेंशियल स्टेटमेंट्स पे रिलाई करना, डिस्क्लोज करना, whether those be included in the scope of auditor? Yes, because auditor deals with financial statements in its entirety, right? But अगर मैं आपको ये पूछूं कि क्या ऑडिटर फाइनेंशियल स्टेटमेंट एक किसी भी एंटिटी का प्रिपेयर कर सकता है या प्रेजेंट कर सकता है? The answer is strictly no, because an auditor cannot assist or help in preparation and presentation of financial statement, right? So that is excluded from the scope of auditors. In addition to this, exclusions also involve investigation. Investigation is completely different from auditing, and you are not liable to check the authentication of documents. Okay, so these are some of the inclusions and exclusions in the scope of auditor. अब थोड़ा सा याद करो, हमने एक इनहेरेंट लिमिटेशंस पढ़ी थी कि ऑडिट में ऑडिटर के लिए एक बहुत ही इंपॉर्टेंट इनहेरेंट लिमिटेशंस है, and that is auditor cannot gain absolute assurance that financial statements are free from material misstatement. We cannot get an absolute assurance. There is an inherent limitation. We can only get reasonable assurance, right? And this all concepts, depending on nature of audit, depending on the scope and objectives of auditors, was all dealt with chapter number 1 in CA Inter. Those are included in the notes itself. The meaning of audit, the auditor's role, definition of audit, highlights from intermediate audit, chapter number 1, nature, objective, and scope of audit. We dealt with objectives, we dealt with scope, we understood what are the limitations, right? And what are the types of engagement. Okay. Now, moving forward, you have understood objectives क्या है, nature क्या है, scope क्या है. Now, when you start performing an audit, when you are at the preliminary stage of conducting an audit, you define or you design an audit strategy. You design an audit strategy. अब audit strategy का purpose क्या है? Audit strategy helps you to conduct audit in an efficient and effective manner. Audit strategy helps you to conduct audit in an efficient and effective manner. Now, to fulfill the strategy that you have prepared for conducting audit, हम audit plan करेंगे. अब I'll give you an example. I'll make you understand कि audit planning क्यों इतनी important है. Audit planning क्यों इतनी important है. For example, if you are planning to make an investment in any of the company, in any of the shares of the company, now prior to making an investment, you'll plan it, you'll understand what are the business, what is the nature of business of the company, right? You'll also understand what are the risk areas of the company, what are the threats to the company, and lastly, you will also understand what is the stop loss, like what is the price that you would want the share, the price of the share should not go down and you should exit, राइट? ये सारी चीजें आप एनालाइज करोगे बिफोर मेकिंग एन इन्वेस्टमेंट. दैट्स द इन्वेस्टमेंट प्लानिंग यू आर मेकिंग. यू कैन ऑल्सो टेक एन take any advice from any knowledgeable person or elder person if you need, so if you feel the requirement. Similarly, जैसे ये एग्जांपल में हमने चार चीजें कवर की कि फर्स्ट विल अंडरस्टैंड द नेचर ऑफ बिजनेस, देन विल अंडरस्टैंड द रिस्क, विल अंडरस्टैंड द मटीरियलिटी. इन सिमिल अगर मैं आपको यही सारी चीजें ऑडिटिंग टर्म्स में समझाऊं कि आप ऑडिट प्लान करते वक्त क्या चीजें कवर करेंगे, क्या चीजें कंसिडर करेंगे, देन इट कम्स दैट first point, understanding of the entity. You will obtain the understanding of the entity कि entity का business क्या है, entity का form and structure क्या है. Secondly, you will assess the risk. Risk assessment will be the second step in audit planning. Third, determining materiality. Based on the income statement or the financial statement, आप एक material amount set करेंगे कि ये amount के कि इस amount के ऊपर अगर आपको कोई भी misstatement identify होती है, so those will be material misstatement. And lastly, you'll involve the help of any expert if you require so for any of the matter. So these are the 4 points. These are the 4 points जो आप audit planning में cover करेंगे. Obtain understanding of entity, risk assessment, determination of materiality, and involvement of experts if any. Okay, so अब तक हम लोगों ने पढ़ा audit strategy and audit planning. Audit strategy and audit planning. The third point which helps us to perform the audit is audit program. Now, what is audit program, sir? Audit program क्या होता है? Audit program is a template. Audit program is a template which involves the steps that you have to perform while doing the procedures, while auditing any of the items. जो भी audit steps आप लेना चाहते हो वो audit program में लिखे होंगे. You have to document that. You have to follow what is written in the audit program. Audit program will also include your scope, like it will be depending on your scope, like what are you supposed to test. Hence, these three things are preliminary important to define before you actually start to perform an audit. क्या क्या पढ़ा हमने? Audit strategy, audit planning, and audit program. These three were covered in chapter number 2 of CA Intermediate. Let's just have a look at it. Audit strategy, audit planning, and audit program. Audit strategy, as we discussed, it helps in conducting audit in an efficient and effective manner. Audit planning, it helps in reducing risk to an acceptable low level. Audit planning helps us to reduce risk at an acceptable low level. Okay, these are the 4 points that involves obtaining understanding of entity, risk assessment, determination of materiality, and exports. All of this we have already discussed, like we have already understood why these steps are important. Okay, lastly, audit program. Steps designed to perform audit procedures. This involves the steps. Now, मूविंग अहेड, हमने प्लान कर लिया कि हमें ऑडिट कंडक्ट करना है. नाउ हमने ऑडिट प्लान करते वक्त एक बात कही थी रिस्क असेसमेंट की. नाउ यू गाइस वुड बी एबल टू रिकलेक्ट कि जब मैं आपको पूछूं कि ऑडिट रिस्क कितने टाइप के होते हैं, आपका आंसर स्ट्रेट फॉरवर्ड होगा, सर 3 टाइप के ऑडिट रिस्क होते हैं. ये तो सबको याद होगा ही, ये तो हमने पढ़ा ही है. आई थिंक ये याद होना ही चाहिए. 3 टाइप के ऑडिट रिस्क: इनहेरेंट रिस्क, कंट्रोल रिस्क, एंड डिटेक्शन रिस्क. इनहेरेंट रिस्क, कंट्रोल रिस्क, एंड डिटेक्शन रिस्क. चलो सर, ऑडिट के रिस्क तो याद है, टाइप ऑफ रिस्क तो याद है, बट क्या इन रिस्क का मतलब याद है अभी भी? क्या इन रिस्क का डेफिनेशन याद है? व्हाट इज इनहेरेंट रिस्क? व्हाट इज इनहेरेंट रिस्क? Risk of material misstatement without considering internal audit, without considering internal controls. I'm sorry. अब इनहेरेंट रिस्क का मतलब क्या है? I'll give you a simple example. Okay, let's take an entity which is into the business of oil refineries. Which is into the business of oil refineries. Now, due to current market, due to current geopolitical tensions and wars, prices of oils has significantly rose across all countries, right? Across all countries. Now, what happens? The inventory, the purchase price of the company will also shoot up significantly. Up आप जब ऑडिट करते हो इन कंपनी के परचेज बिल्स के या इनवॉइसेस के, यू विल फाइंड कि हाँ भाई ऑयल के प्राइसेस तो बड़े हैं एंड वी हैव द इनवॉइस, वी हैव ऑल द टिक्स एज पर देयर प्रोसीजर्स, वी हैव ऑल द टिक्स एज पर देयर कंट्रोल्स। तो सर इसमें रिस्क कैसे हुआ? अगर इनवॉइस प्रॉपर है, पीओ प्रॉपर है, पेमेंट प्रॉपर है, तो इसमें रिस्क कैसे हुआ? इट इज अ नोन फैक्ट कि सर, इट इज अ नोन फैक्ट कि सर ड्यू टू दिस जियोपॉलिटिक्स टेंशन आपके परचेज प्राइस इंक्रीज हुए रहेंगे, आपके प्रॉफिट मार्जिन कम हुए रहेंगे। तो सर इसमें रिस्क क्या है? दैट वुड बी अ डाउट, दैट वुड बी अ क्वेश्चन। बट आप ये समझिए, एज एन ऑडिटर हमें क्वेश्चनिंग माइंड रखना होता है। वी हैव प्रोफेशनल स्केप्टिसिज्म। ऐसे टाइम्स में फ्रॉड होने के भी तो चांसेस है। देयर कैन बी एरर, देयर कैन बी फ्रॉड, देयर कैन बी एरर्स, राइट? कि हमने परचेज प्राइस इन्फ्लेट करके रखा हो, हमारा इन्वेंट्री का जो रिकॉर्ड किया हुआ है कॉस्ट अपने असेट इन्फ्लेट करके रखे हो। देयर कैन बी अ चांस ऑफ misappropriation of assets, right? And that is the reason there is an inherent risk and also a significant inherent risk, right? Without, because यहाँ पे जबकि हम कंट्रोल्स की बात ही नहीं कर रहे हैं, such kind of risk of fraud or error would be classified as inherent risk. अब समझ में आया? याद आ रहा है थोड़ा जो इनहेरेंट रिस्क हमने पढ़े थे? सेकेंड एग्जाम्पल वुड बी related party transactions. Second example would be related party transactions. If there has been a transaction between related parties at an arm's length price, आपको मैनेजमेंट तो ये जस्टिफाई कर देगा कि हमने आर्म्स लेंथ प्राइस पे ट्रांजेक्शन किया है, but you would also have to verify that, right? You would also have to check whether the price determined for this related party transaction, क्या सही में वो प्राइस मार्केट के हिसाब से सही बराबर है या नहीं है। सो दैट कैन ऑल्सो बी एन एंगल वेयर अ रिस्क ऑफ एरर और फ्रॉड specifically can happen. So such type of risk will also be counted as inherent risk because we are not considering internal controls, right? Moving on to the second type of controls, which is control risk. Second type of risk, which is control risk. Now, this is slightly easier to understand. These are control risk are a risk of material misstatement where controls or internal controls fails to prevent, detect, or correct the misstatement in timely manner. Fails to prevent, detect, and correct the error इन द टाइमली मैनर। सिंपल, अगर कोई एरर हमारे कंट्रोल्स के वजह से हुआ है, कंट्रोल्स के इनएफिशिएंट होने के वजह से हुआ है, सो दैट वुड बी पार्ट ऑफ कंट्रोल रिस्क। लेट्स टेक एन एग्जांपल। हमने हमारे पास पीओ है, हमारे पास इनवॉइस है। द अमाउंट इन पीओ एंड इनवॉइस इज डिफरेंट बट स्टिल द पेमेंट वाज मेड, स्टिल द पेमेंट वाज मेड। यहाँ पे हमारा कंट्रोल इनएफिशिएंट है बिकॉज द invoice amount should be matching with the PO amount, right? That's a pretty easy example of control risk. Lastly, we move on to the detection risk. Now, detection risk are further bifurcated into two parts. First, sampling risk, and second is non-sampling risk. अब sampling risk क्या होता है? As we all know, as you guys are performing audit during your articleship, we determine materiality, right, as per our planning steps. The third point in audit planning, we would determine the materiality. हम मटेरियल अमाउंट्स के ऊपर जो भी ट्रांजेक्शन्स हुए रहते हैं इन एनी ऑफ द एरियाज दैट यू आर ऑडिटिंग, आप उनको एज अ सैंपल सिलेक्ट करते हो, राइट? नाउ सैंपल्स टेस्ट करते वक्त इफ यू अराइव एट अ रॉन्ग कंक्लूजन बेस्ड ऑन सैंपल्स टेस्टेड, वो हो जाता है आपका सैम्पलिंग रिस्क। कि इवन आफ्टर टेस्टिंग द सैंपल्स यू अराइव एट अ रॉन्ग कंक्लूजन बिकॉज इट कैन हैपन कि सैंपल जो हमने सिलेक्ट किया उसमें कोई एरर था बट ओवरऑल पॉपुलेशन में इतना एरर नहीं था। दैट वाज ओनली वन ऑफ सच इंस्टेंस। So that would be counted as sampling risk. And non-sampling risk means any other risk which has happened without considering samples, like with any other reason वहाँ पे जहाँ पे samples involved नहीं है would be called as non-sampling risk. Okay, so chapter number 3, with the help of we should not forget standards on auditing of 300 series, 315, 320, also 330 gives us also 330 that gives us an auditor's responses to assessed risk. Auditor's responses to assessed risk. अब समझ लो risk तो हमने identify कर लिया. There can be this 3 types of risk. But what would be your response? How would you deal with it? What would be your response towards those assessed risk? Okay, you can either conduct test of controls. Okay, where you will actually perform walkthroughs. जो एंटिटी के आप जो एंटिटी का आप ऑडिट कर रहे हो उनके पास प्रोसेस नोट्स होते हैं, उनके पास प्रोसेस कंट्रोल्स होते हैं. You will obtain those controls and based on those controls आप डॉक्यूमेंट्स उनसे रिक्वेस्ट करेंगे टू मेक श्योर दैट those internal controls are efficient and effective. That would be the first step to test controls. And if you want to test further, you can perform substantive procedures. Which would involve test of details and analytical procedures. Analytical procedures. In test of details, you would involve samples, you will test samples, you will reach the conclusions. And while performing analytical procedures, you will compare the ratios between year over year, that whether there are any significant increase or decrease in the items of financial statements. So all of this was covered in chapter number 3, which deals with risk and standards of 300 series, which also deals us with auditors' responses. Just quickly have a glance at what we have noted as the important concepts of chapter number 3, then we'll move ahead. We have given the reference of SA 315, 320, 330. We divided audit risk into 3: inherent risk, control risk, detection risk. Detection risk was further bifurcated into sampling risk, non-sampling risk. We also deal with internal controls. Controls are designed, implemented, and maintained to achieve entities' objectives. Okay. 5 components we are going to deal with in our final as well. Then SA 330, as we discussed about auditors' responses to assessed risk, right? Test of controls and substantive procedures. Now, moving further, we have already made our plan. For audit. We have assessed the risk. Now, we will conduct audit. Let's go a step further into procedures. We will gather audit evidences. Audit evidence से related हमें हमें 2 चीज बहुत importantly सिखाई गई थी, that audit evidence should be sufficient and appropriate. Audit evidence should be sufficient and appropriate. Now, what does that mean? कि ऑडिट एविडेंस का क्वांटम इतना होना चाहिए that you can easily give the conclusion, you can easily reach the conclusion, and it should be appropriate. It means जो area आप टेस्ट कर रहे हो वो ही area का वो audit evidence होना चाहिए, right? So 2 things primarily जो आपको याद रखनी है is sufficient and appropriate. And audit evidence related, we have ample amount of guidelines given by standard 500 series, whether it is like external confirmation, whether it involves n number of guidelines that you have to follow for gathering audit evidences. Okay, let's have some quick references to SA 500, SA 501 special consideration, 510 initial audit engagement, analytical procedures, audit samplings, related parties. Right? Now, moving further to chapter number 5, moving further on chapter number 5 of CA Inter, it taught us important assertions for each and every line item of financial statement, each and every line item of financial statements. Now, assertions are very, very important for an audit, for an auditor to remember. Like it is going to help us, it is going to test us at each and every concept, at each and every level. So this part should be completely, by hearted by you कि भाई audit assertions क्या क्या होते हैं and what does it mean. Now let's quickly revise audit assertions. We have 5 assertions at income statement level and balance sheet level. Okay, we have 5 assertions. Let's quickly do the assertions which are common for both. Okay, let's start with the assertions which are common for both. First, let's take completeness. Let's take completeness. Any transactions recorded in the books of accounts, whether those are complete, whether those are recorded in complete manner or not, whether those transactions should not be omitted or should not be partially omitted. Okay, proper and an entire transaction is recorded or not. ये हम टेस्ट करेंगे completeness में, and it is applicable to all the line items, whether those are profit and loss items or those are balance sheet items. Going further, second assertions, which is a common one, is cut off. Is cut off. Now, what does cut off assertion means? कि सर करंट ईयर का ट्रांजैक्शन है, करंट ईयर का ट्रांजैक्शंस अगर है तो करंट ईयर में ही रिकॉर्ड होना चाहिए, वेदर द रिसिप्ट और पेमेंट इज हैपेंड प्रायर टू करंट ईयर और नेक्स्ट टू करंट ईयर और इन द नेक्स्ट ईयर. बट अगर वो ट्रांजैक्शन अगर इस साल अप्रूव हुआ है तो इसी साल रिकॉर्ड होगा. ओके, दैट इज द मीनिंग ऑफ कट ऑफ. Cutoff is applicable to all the items, whether it's P&L item or balance sheet item. Third common assertion is presentation and disclosure. Third common assertion is presentation and disclosure. Let's take an example कि एक entity के पास बहुत सारा debt है, एक entity के पास बहुत सारा debt है, then has the management properly presented those debt into short term portion and into long term portion. जो पोर्शन उनका नेक्स्ट 12 मंथ्स में ड्यू है, क्या उन्होंने वो करंट लायबिलिटी में शो किया है, वेदर दे हैव मेड द एक्यूरेट प्रेजेंटेशन. अगर आपको कोई डिस्क्लोजर देना है, अगर वो लोग ने डिस्क्लोजर दिया है फुटनोट्स में, these are the things that you are going to test when you deal with assertions of presentation and disclosure. And again, one of the common assertion at both the levels. Now, let's deal with two other assertions which are only applicable to income statements, First is occurrence. जो ट्रांजैक्शन आपने रिकॉर्ड किया है, क्या वो इन रियल लाइफ अकर हुआ है या नहीं, ये टेस्ट करना है. एंड सेकेंडली इवैल्यूएशन, मेजरमेंट, कि जो ट्रांजैक्शन जो प्राइस पे रिकॉर्ड हुआ है, दैट शुड बी recorded accurately. Okay, so these are the two separate assertions जो हमने पढ़े for income statements. Let's quickly just revise 5 assertions of income statement: completeness, cutoff, presentation and disclosures, occurrence and measurement. Okay, ये हो गए पांच assertions income statement के. Moving to the remaining 2 assertions of balance sheet. First is rights and obligation. Now, whatever assets and liabilities are recorded in the books of like balance sheet, in the books of accounts, those should be either owned or owed by the entity. वो entity के right and obligation होने चाहिए. Okay, entity का हक है या entity को वो पे करना है, that should be checked as an assertion for rights and obligation. And lastly, we'll also check the valuation. Whether the valuation recorded in balance sheet are accurate, are correct. Okay, so these are the 5 assertions that we are going to deal with in balance sheet items. Again, completeness, cutoff, presentation and disclosures, rights and obligations, and valuation. Okay, let's just quickly see what we have noted in chapter number 5, the important concept from chapter number 5. Assertions at income statement level and assertions at balance sheet level. Okay, now moving further, हमने प्लानिंग कर लिया, हमने रिस्क असेस कर लिया, हमने ऑडिट एविडेंस गैदर कर लिया, राइट? अब बचा क्या? बचा डॉक्यूमेंटेशन। जो भी जितने भी एविडेंसेस आपने कलेक्ट किए हैं, जो भी कंक्लूजन्स आपने रीच किए हैं, वो सारी चीजों को डॉक्यूमेंट करना है। ऑडिट डॉक्यूमेंटेशन इज वन ऑफ दैट इम्पॉर्टेंट स्टेप के ऑडिटर्स को हर एरिया में, हर टाइप ऑफ एंगेजमेंट में काम आता है। Guided by SA 230, audit documentation involves documenting all the procedures that an auditor has conducted, documenting all the evidences that the auditor has gathered, and documenting the conclusions reached by the auditor. देखिए, ऐसे 230 का रेफरेंस दिया गया है, ऑडिट प्रोसीजर्स परफॉर्म किए हुए नोट करने हैं, ऑडिट एविडेंस ऑब्टेन किए हैं वो, एंड कंक्लूजन्स रीच्ड, राइट? नाउ मूविंग टुवर्ड्स द एंड पार्ट of the entire audit procedures, रीचिंग टू कंक्लूजन्स, रीचिंग टू कंप्लीशन एंड रिव्यू। एक बार आपका ऑडिट परफॉर्म करके हो गया, you are at the later stage of audit, when you are at the end of audit, there are 3 to 4 steps guided exactly by the standards on auditing कि आपको क्या क्या चीजें परफॉर्म करनी है। फर्स्ट एंड फॉरमोस्ट, you all are aware that हमारा बुक्स क्लोज हो जाता है 31 मार्च को, राइट? हमारा बुक्स क्लोज हो जाता है 31 मार्च को, बट हम ऑडिट करते रहते हैं अप्रैल में, जून में, हम ऑडिट करते रहते हैं मई जून तक। देन वी हैव एट द एंड, व्हेन यू आर concluding the audit, when you are in the completion process, you are going to inquire about subsequent events के in the month of April to June, after the year end, has there been any incident which is significant to the company, which is significant to the entity, and those events are to be noted in subsequent events. Those events are to be documented in subsequent events. You will, as an auditor, we will also inquire about going concern assumption. Whether the company or the entity is going to be able to operate their business in the next 12 foreseeable months, right? Lastly, you will also have communication with TCWG and gather management representation. All of this simply guided by standards on auditing. All of this are simply guided by standards on auditing. Chapter 8, chapter number 8, we are now, as we are already at the end of audit, completion हो गया, review हो गया, क्या बचा? आपने ऑडिट स्टार्ट कर लिया, प्लानिंग, प्रोसीजर, स्ट्रैटेजी, प्रोग्राम्स, रिस्क असेसमेंट, internal controls, audit risk, audit evidence, audit documentation, and completion. Okay. अब the most important thing, what are the 2 objectives? जो 2 objectives हमने सबसे पहले पढ़े थे, कौन से थे वो? First, to gain reasonable assurance whether the financial statements are free from material misstatement, and second, communicate findings with via audit report. So the next chapter focuses on audit report. Now, audit report has multiple titles, has multiple pointers we are going to deal with, like in our further videos when we go deep into the CA final audit. But overall, ऑडिट रिपोर्ट में क्या क्या चीजें होती है, फॉर मोस्ट इम्पोर्टेंटली you are going to provide your opinion as per SS 700. You are going to provide your opinion as per SS 700. You are going to give the basis of opinion or the modified opinion as per 705, as per SS 705. If there are any matters, if there are any key audit matters communicated during the audit, you are going to record, you are going to document that in the audit report as per SS 701. एंड लास्टली, अगर कोई ऐसे मैटर्स है जो एज अ ऑडिटर आप चाहते हो कि शेयर होल्डर्स का एक्स्ट्रा एम्फोसिस हो उन मैटर्स पर, सो यू आर गोइंग टू रिकॉर्ड दैट इन अ सेपरेट पैराग्राफ ऑन एम्फोसिस ऑन other matters as per SS 706, right? So these are the paragraphs that are important for us to be remembering, and what should be the part of audit report. Okay, we are towards the end of our first video where we are revising each and every important concepts from CA Inter that are going to be the strong base and foundation for your CA final audit. Lastly, हमने ऑडिट रिपोर्ट कर लिया. नाउ वी dealt, like we learned about various salient features of entities, like whether the entity is profit oriented, whether the entity is public undertaking, whether it's government entity, whether it's a profit entity, whether it is a trust, profit proprietorship or partnership. All these features were dealt with CA Inter. Those are done and dusted. Okay. In chapter number 9, we learned about salient features. In chapter number 9, we learned about different entities. Now, moving ahead with chapter number 10, we learned about audit of banks. Okay. Now, audit of banks was utmost important at an intermediate level, because जब आप आर्टिकलशिप करते हो, you would get an ample amount of opportunity कि आप एक साल में एटलीस्ट बैंक ऑडिट करें. अगर आप अगर अगर आप इतना लकी है तो आपके पास शायद कॉन्करेंट ऑडिट भी आ सकता है. सो दैट इज द रीजन कि ऑडिट ऑफ बैंक्स वाज वन ऑफ द मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंट चैप्टर इन इंटर ऑडिट एज वेल, जहाँ पे हमने ये सीखा था जहाँ पे हमने ये सीखा था कि ऑडिट, अगर हमें बैंक ऑडिट करना हो, बैंक के जो मेजर ऑपरेशंस है, एडवांसेस, लोन्स, डिपॉजिट्स, क्रेडिट कार्ड एंड एनपीएस, सो ये सारे एरियाज का अगर हमें ऑडिट करना हो, सो व्हाट आर द प्रोसीजर्स, व्हाट आर द आइटम्स दैट एन ऑडिटर कैन इवैल्यूएट और वेरीफाई, ये सारी चीजें हमने पढ़ी थी चैप्टर नंबर 10 में. चैप्टर नंबर 10 वाज ऑडिट ऑफ बैंक्स. एंड लास्ट एंड foremost, the most important chapter from audit for CA Inter was chapter number 11, that was entirely related to professional ethics. I can totally vouch that no one would forget that we had so many ethics to remember of in chapter number 11. Do not worry, we are going to cover that in CA final as well. So let's keep it that for the final level. Just a quick reference on chapter number 10, audit of banks, and chapter number 11, ethics and form of audit engagement. Okay. Now, we have covered various important topics of CA Inter that are going to help us to understand each and everything that we are going to deal with in CA final level. Now, again, if I have to give you some bifurcation about CA final, कि हम CA final में audit को कैसे देखेंगे. सर, CA final में हम audit को 3 पार्ट में डिवाइड करेंगे. First and foremost is auditing standards, second is professional ethics, and third is other chapters. सर ऐसा क्यों? क्योंकि सर auditing standards, like at CA final level, ICAI has leveled up for auditing standards. We are not simply going to refer SA 200 to 700 series. Those are already covered in Inter. Those are also a part of CA final audit, but we have many new standards to deal with. There is a standard on 800 series, there is a standard on related services, related engagements and assurance engagements. So those are the new standards that we are going to deal with. And इनका वेटेज अगर आप जाने तो standards will form a part of 50 to 60 marks of your entire paper. So that importance auditing standards hold at CA final level. Ethics will come around 15 to 20 marks. It's pretty similar from what we used to have. And other chapters will form another part of 30 to 40 marks. Okay. सर, हर स्टूडेंट को एक सिंपल डाउट होता है कि क्या हम अदर चैप्टर्स को इग्नोर करें, क्या हम अदर चैप्टर्स को ऑप्शंस में छोड़ दें? स्टैंडर्ड्स और एथिक्स कर लेते सर, 80 मार्क्स का तो कवरेज हो ही जाएगा, इतना तो आ ही जाएगा. बट नहीं, other chapters are more important. भले उनका weightage कम हो. I'll give you an example. If any of the question comes from digital audit, consolidation or PSU, अगर उसमें से कोई question आता है, you have simple answers to write, like you simple have pointers that we will cover in our lectures, in our series, जो आपको स्ट्रेट फॉरवर्ड आंसर्स लिखने होंगे एंड those are going to directly match with ICI's suggested answers, and you are going to earn 3 out of 3 or 4 out of 4 for those answers, because वहाँ पे आपके पर्सनल या प्रोफेशनल जजमेंट्स assumptions या conclusions का इतना ज़्यादा पार्ट नहीं होता. And that answers or those small answers can earn you direct out of marks. And that is why, even if the weightage is less, even if the weightage of those other chapters are less, वो उतना इम्पोर्टेंस है उस आंसर्स का, उस मार्क्स का इम्पोर्टेंस उतना ज़्यादा है जितना मैं स्टैंडर्ड्स को देता हूँ. So for me, no one will ever leave any of the chapter in options. Okay, we are going to cover each and everything. We are going to cover entire syllabus. Okay, and lastly, on a lighter note, like everyone would be aware that आपका writing और writing and paper pattern कैसा होगा. 70 marks का आपका descriptive होता है and 30 marks का आपका MCQs होगा, MCQs and case based scenarios. Okay, with that, I'm going to wrap this session, the first session of CA Final Audit, like the introduction of CA Final Audit. What have we dealt in this video? Sir, हमने हमारा base strong किया है. From now on, whatever we are going to study, we are going to understand the logic behind it. हम कोई भी चीज रट्टा नहीं मारेंगे, हम कोई भी चीज मग अप नहीं करेंगे. We are going to understand it. We are going to understand the concept behind it. We are going to understand the reasoning behind it कि हम ये procedure क्यों follow करते हैं. Simple as it is. With that, I, CA Vatsal Shah, your mentor at Chartered World Academy, invite you to be part of this series and would like to see you in our next lecture of this series. Thank you all.